Hello chess friends, welcome back to our YouTube channel. Here's a great game played by Arjun Erigaisi, and in this video we're gonna decode exactly how Arjun wins so many games. In fact, he's on a great winning streak. He just wins tournaments after tournament. He's been rising up the ladder, and his rating is nearly going to be 2700 very soon. I think at the moment it's something around 2675, so he's very close to reaching 2700. In fact, when Magnus was asked about him, as you can read in the quote above, Magnus was asked, "What do you think about the rising star from Bharat, Arjun Erigaisi?" And Magnus said, "Well, Arjun is going to be 2700 soon. He plays chess in a way that I enjoy a lot. You can just sense that he somehow knows how to play, and he has a very good, sharp tactical eye. At the same time, his biggest strength, that is of Arjun's, is to switch style." And that's very true, what Magnus said. I've seen Arjun play some brilliant end games. At the same time, he's very good at positional play. At the same time, he's good at attacking, as you'll see in the game. And if you look at the clash between Arjun and Magnus Carlsen, that was a tremendous game, and Arjun pulled off something nearly miraculous. Magnus was attacking him left and right, but Arjun was so cool and calm, and he defended in the best possible resourceful manner. That was just a great game. So let's have a look at this game. So we're gonna basically decode how Arjun plays and what we can learn from him and how it can help us. So let's get started. Well, Arjun playing white kicked off the game with e4. We have e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and here we have pawn to d4. Now this is nowadays a rare guest. It's a Scotch opening, but it was a favorite of obviously the Garry Kasparov, former world champion. So takes, knight f6, and we have this theoretical duel happening on e5. Now the main move is queen to e7. The idea is you're basically pinning the pawn, so white can't really capture the knight, and you're asking white, how are you going to defend the pawn, because I'm threatening to capture the pawn, of course, with my queen. So white's main move here is to play queen to e2, and we have a very interesting, strange looking position. Both the queens are placed in a way that they are restricting their own bishops development. So it's quite an interesting setup. However, this position has been reached hundreds and hundreds of times. So knight to d5, as queen e2, actually the threat was to capture the knight. So there was a real threat. So knight to d5 played. Now here we have a very interesting move, pawn to h4. Now this somehow reminds me of games played by Kramnik. Kramnik used to push his rook's pawn, and well, one of the main ideas of this could actually be to make some rook left like this, maybe here, or maybe even here. Could happen. That could be one of the potential ideas. So quite a nice move, and this is where I'm going to take you to one of the important points of what we are going to learn from this game. So here we go. The first thing of how Arjun always wins or nearly always wins is surprise element. Now going back, just look at this position. This is not the most common move. In fact, it's been very rarely played. There are only few games with this move, and those games are by top players, but they are played in online chess. So this is a very rare guest at the top level. So basically, what Arjun has prepared is a very interesting novelty, rarely played at the top level. It's not the first time it's been played, but a rare guest, and this is where he starts to take control over the game. He's always the one to surprise his opponent. So that I think works very well in this part. So surprise element, you should always be the one to surprise your element. And as you've heard of the quote, a player surprised is half beaten. So that is something to be remembered. Queen e6. That's an interesting move. Now we have knight to d2. Obviously, you don't want to put the knight on c3 where it can be swept away and then white's pawns get disrupted. At the same time, the idea can be to push forward with pawn to c4. So that's one of the main ideas. At the same time, this knight can actually land on the e4 square, from which it can look at various squares like the f6 as well as the g5 square. So it's a very strong uh, maneuver of the knight. Now we have pawn to a5. Excellent move. Well, basically you'd like to develop your bishop. Now there's always a question, where do you develop bishop and how do you develop it? Even if you bring it to b7, is it really that effective? Is it really that good? And that's the reason you have to play a5. So the point is, you might develop the bishop on a6 where it can actually put some pressure along this diagonal. and force some exchange. So it's quite a good move. Now, pawn to c4 played. This is one of the main moves. Knight to b6 and pawn to h5 played. So here we have a very interesting setup. Why did Arjun play pawn to h5? Well, the answer is quite simple. He's making it very difficult for his opponent to develop his pieces. You can see this bishop. If one of the ways of developing it was to play g6 and bishop g7, but now that is out of the option because out of the box, because now if you play g6, that is a hook and we can obviously capture it. At the same time, because of our pawn on e5, you can even play knight e4 and the knight can actually go to the f6 square. It can look at the f6 square. So that gives you some extra possibilities in the position and it makes life a little bit difficult for black. Now we have bishop to a6 and this is where things really started to go wrong for black. I think this was the starting point. In the game, b3 was played and this is quite a nice move. Basically what Arjun is doing is asking black, what is your knight? What is your knight and bishop doing in the corner? I mean, this is a very solid pawn chain. What are they doing? They have no scope, they have nowhere to go, no squares at all. So why do you put them in the corner? So this bishop to a6 move is actually, it doesn't make sense because they are hitting a gray knight over here and so that is quite a nice move. Pawn to b3, it also prepares the pawn bishop going to b2. But this position actually has been reached earlier in a game of Jan Nepomniachtchi, and interestingly, here he played a very strong move, pawn to h6. Now this is an excellent move. He'd like to capture on g7, in which case the h7 pawn is damaged, and you can see the black king is still in the center. That's one of the major problems for him. If captures, then you have totally destroyed this pawn chain. Now you just continue naturally with b3 and something like castles, bishop b2, bishop g7, long castles, and now pawn to f4, well, supporting your strong pawn in the center, f6, and Jan played knight to e4, and in fact he went on to win the game after the move knight to c5, attacking both the bishop and the queen, and this was played in an online game. But basically Arjun played pawn to b3, which is obviously very nice move. It protects the pawn on c3, c4, at the same time makes his bishop and knight look dull, and it doesn't really make sense to have a bishop and knight over there. But every move has a weakness and an advantage. The advantage of this move is obviously that it restricts his opponent. At the same time, it also develops the bishop to b2. Excellent diagonal. But it also has a weakness, and the weakness is the pawn to b3 move is a hook in itself, and that's why a5 was played. That's a good move. a4. Now bishop to b2. We have bishop to b7. Now this is a move that gives us an idea of what exactly is happening with black. Maybe black is not very sure about where he needs his pieces. You put your bishop on a6 and then you bring it back to b7. Clearly shows that you're not really sure where your pieces belong. And that was one of the indications that black is a little uncomfortable over here. We have pawn to g3. So maybe developing the bishop here, maybe on g2, depends on what he does. Bishop to b4. We have bishop g2. Takes and the pair of rook goes off. Castles, castles. Pawn to d6. Knight to f3. Pawn to f6. Knight to d4. Well, we are asking him, do you want to capture? Because if you don't, if you go back, then I'm going to simply have a pass pawn, a very powerful and strong pass pawn on e6. So obviously black would like to get rid of that very strong pawn. And this is where Arjun started to show his class. So let me go to point number 2 of what we can learn from this game. And that is over here. So material versus quality and energy. The third one is energy. Obviously we have seen the surprise element. Now it's time for material versus quality and energy. So let's have a look at this. Yeah, there we go. So in the game, Arjun played the move queen to d1. What was the point of this? Well, he never wanted to exchange queens. In fact, the point is now the bishop is eyeing the queen, and there are some chances of giving a discovery with knight takes c6, in which case we might even win this bishop. That's a very strong move, and that's why black just moved his queen back. But now here comes another strong move with energy. Arjun plays with great energy over here. Pawn to h6. This is a tremendous move. Obviously, if you take There are several ways to continue, of course. You can also go knight f5, in which case you're attacking the queen, you're attacking the pawn. That's a disgusting position to play with black. At the same time, there's also this pawn which is hanging, so bishop into c6 is always on the cards. So there's so many of these ideas. In fact, black. When I looked at the game, I was watching the game live, and Arjun was just getting up. He just make the move, and he would just get up from the board and let his opponent think and just leave him alone basically, because the position was quite difficult for black and black was consuming a lot of time. So black played pawn to g6, but the position is already very difficult. Why is that so? So here we go. We have a material versus quality difference. So what is that? Basically, compare this bishop and this pieces with black's pieces. This knight is so powerful. Just look at the amount of squares he controls. This bishop is basically cutting off across his diagonal. That is the bishop that's going to win us the game. That bishop on a1 reminds me of a game of Alpha Zero, including the pawn on the h6 square. This is how neural networks like to play. At the same time, our other bishop is also very strong. A rook will soon come on e1 in the future. So this is such a tremendous position for white. So basically, white is a pawn down. Black has a material advantage, a pawn, but what white has is tremendous amount of energy and activity in his position. So obviously, activity always triumphs over material. So let's go forward. Bishop takes c6. You can't really capture the bishop, because if you do, well, that's what happens. You're gonna lose a piece. You're gonna lose the bishop if you save the queen, of course. So black thought, well, it's time. I better retreat and try to bring the bishop from some other square. Now just knight to c2. Excellent square. Saying to black that where are you going to move the piece, because if you go back I'll just play pawn to b4 and your bishop is nearly trapped. So d5 was played, but that's a loose pawn, and in fact after takes, bishop takes here. Again, this game somehow reminds me of the games played by Alpha Zero. Look at these bishops. First of all, the pawn on h6 is something that happened typically in the games of Alpha Zero. This one, this is just beautiful. The way it looks is so beautiful, and in fact you can't even capture the bishop. Let me just show you what happens if you dare to do it. Now we have queen takes, the check. Obviously going in is quite dangerous, so let's have a look at rook to f7. Now here is pawn to c5. This is a brilliant move. The threat is obviously, well, you want to capture on f6. At the same time, you want to cut off the queen from going back to the defense. At the same time, you're also defending your own pawn. It's such a powerful move, and I can give a token line where, for example, bishop e7. You can actually capture this. You can get the bishop back. Now that there is no pawn on this square, this diagonal is free. In fact, we'd like to play queen to e5 followed by threats of checkmate. So if he tries to defend that, let's say with this, just over here, and that's pretty much lost. Checkmate is threatened. In fact, the best move that engine suggests is queen to f6, giving material. And yeah, if that's the best move that an engine is suggesting, you have to know that the position is already lost. So going back, let's go back to the position. Black did not capture the bishop, but rather move his king. And now here's a very cool move by Arjun. Bishop to g2. This is basically saying, look buddy, I have the entire control in this position. I am the one who's dominating the game. In fact, I don't even need to do anything critical. I just get my piece back and look at your position. Your knight has nowhere to go. It has absolutely no squares. Your bishop has been restricted. Your rook is absolutely tied up to the pawn, because the moment it moves, this monster bishop on a1 will just cut across the diagonal. That will be end of the game. At the same time, what's the queen on b4 doing? So every single piece of black is stupidly placed. In a way, it's not really there's no coordination in the black pieces, whereas if you look at the white pieces, these bishops are monsters. They remind me from the games of Fischer, you know. So this is how the game ends. Now bishop to f5. Black is trying hard to solve his problems, but unfortunately there's a tremendous winning move that just finishes off the game. Pawn to g4. Well, that's protected. You have to move the bishop. Let's see you move it back. Now comes pawn to g5. You can't really capture the monster bishop on a1. Again, it reminds me of Alpha Zero. And let's say you play something. Basically, after the move pawn to g4, the game was resigned. Black resigned this position. So what could happen is something like this. We just get a rook in the last piece, and here there are sacrifices. The point is the knight is incapable of capturing it. It's pinned over here thanks to a monster bishop as usual. And there's a threat of checkmate over here which cannot be stopped. It can be prolonged but cannot be stopped. For example, you can capture this, but then just king h2. And again you see that the knight is pinned. There is a threat of checkmate over here. And in fact nothing can be done. Rook f7, and this should force resignation. It's just a beautiful combinative game. The pawn, the queen, and the bishop were a deadly combination. That is how Arjun Erigaisi played this game with tremendous amount of energy, and that's why I'd like to take your attention to the 3 points again. First one, always surprise your opponent with a novelty or something that is unusual. Secondly, material versus quality. If it's necessary to give up pawns, do give up pawns. It's all about activity, it's all about energy. And of course, talking about energy, the way Arjun played, every single one of his pieces was radiating energy, and that is how you want your games to be. So these are the three things you learn from the games of Arjun Erigaisi, and that is why he wins. Of course, it's not that simple, but he is so close to reaching 2700. As you can see the quote above, he's going to be 2700 soon, and his style is quite lovely and I do like his style a lot. So we're gonna have to keep an eye on this guy very keenly. He might be a champ in the future. So until next time, see you guys.